Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Patriots History. If you hear a fan in the background, that's because this is Arizona, and it's already starting to get hot out here. It was in the hundreds, I think, the other day, 100 or so, which to me is fine. I mean, I've got no problem with that. But inside this office, it can get kind of warm, especially with all these lights hitting on me. Anyway, hey, I'm Larry Swikart, co-author of Patriots History of the United States Now in its 20th anniversary edition. You want to get the 20th anniversary PDF, which is what it is. It's a new chapter with 20 pages of new additional inserted material. All you have to do is to go to the Wild World of History page. Now you got to scroll down quite a ways. I admit you got to look for it. Go way down, and you'll see a couple of boxes where it'll say subscribe to the newsletter. It doesn't cost you anything. All you have to do is give us your name and your address. Boom, you'll get a copy in your email of Patriots History 20th Anniversary Edition. If you don't get one within a week or so, email me at larry@wildworldhistory.com. All right. Now, don't forget also, Patriots History of Globalism. You've got to grab yourself a copy of that. It's really important for where we are in the world today. It'll give you a lot of history, and it'll give you a lot of hope. I know for many people, these are hopeless, helpless times. No, don't believe it. They are on their heels. They're afraid of us. We just need to go out and give them one last good push, and they'll go over, and it's coming. So get your copy of Patriots History of Globalism. Remember, if you don't know, I have a full curriculum that goes with Patriots History of the United States, includes teacher's guides, student guides, workbooks, tests, answer keys, all the images I use in my videos. Did I say videos? Yes, I did. I teach every chapter in 45 to 1 hour long videos, high quality production, maps, images, the whole ball of wax, all for until June 1st, $179. Then the price is going up. And then after the conventions are over in July, they really go up. It goes back up to like $299 or $309, something like that. So you want to get your curriculum right away. No license to expire. It's yours as long as you want it. If you got several kids coming up, use it with all of them. If you have a co-op, you can use it with up to 5. Then I ask you to buy me a new curriculum every time you go the next 5 kids. For every 5 kids, get a curriculum. World history. I've got a world history curriculum from 1775 to the present. Again, a year-long course. And again, I teach it all in video. There's teachers' guides, student workbooks, tests, and of course, 2 books in the second semester. A lot of reading in that second semester, which is why I want you to do Patriots History of the United States, U.S. History 1, U.S. 2, World 1, and then the biggie is World History, not World War, World History 2. World War I comes in that second semester. All right. We are in the American Civil War, and no shots have been fired yet. We are looking at the Confederate States of America. In our last 2 sessions, we read Robert Toombs and the case for secession, and then we read Alexander H. Stephens, who had become the vice president of the Confederacy, against secession. So now we are ready to dive into the book again, and I am on page 316 of the 15th anniversary edition. Now, again, I always have to say this. If you have an earlier edition, the page numbers will not line up. Some of the headers won't even line up. So you may have to look around if you're in an earlier edition, but we are in chapter, what is it? 9, Crisis of the Union. And we're starting under the section called Confederate States of America, but we're down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 paragraphs. So Southern ideals of what secession entails sprang from 3 main sources. First, during the past decade, Southerners had come to hate free soil concepts, finding them deeply offensive, not only to the cotton economy to which they were committed, but to the system of white supremacy ingrained in the culture of the South. This had produced, no matter how unintended, a dismissive and patronizing attitude towards small non-slave owning landowners. So it is true that in the war, the majority of those who fought did not own slaves. Again, we've been through why that doesn't matter. But this is part of it, that the planter elite didn't like these people any more than our elites today don't like us. It's also severely retarded inventiveness and innovation, contributing to an overall lack of scientific inquisitiveness in the South. This is proven, by the way, through patent studies in the South. And there were not even 10% of the patents in the United States were coming from the southern states, because all the ingenuity comes from people who own their own land or are trying to better it. If you can just add 5 more slaves, you don't really think about how do I improve productivity in the system I have. You just add another slave. Second, well, let me mention something else, though. This planter mentality also resulted in a unwillingness of people to do manual labor themselves. And so they began to get disconnected from the very concept of what is work. And increasingly, not all of them, but increasingly, you began to see a lot of these planter elites living, Stevie Winwood would say, back in the high life again, right? They're living high on the hog, but they aren't often making as much as they're consuming. Their life consists of, sort of like the royals in Europe, this never-ending series of parties and so forth, balls, and getting them to understand the plight of shopkeepers or welders or iron workers or merchant seamen or anything like that was just beyond them. So they get to be very insulated. All right. Second, a residual notion of states' rights from the days of the anti-federalists, nurtured by such thinkers as George Mason and John Calhoun, had gained popularity in the 1850s. The sovereignty of the states over the Union had a mixed and contradictory record of support by leading Southerners, including Jefferson and Jackson. Under the Confederacy, the principle of states' rights emerged unfettered and triumphant. Now, remember, I hate to keep interrupting, but this is important. Remember, Jackson was going to send in the U.S. military to collect the tariff of abominations into South Carolina. And he was going to hang John C. Calhoun for opposing it. So don't give me the stuff about what a great small government guy Andrew Jackson was. He did not believe in the states' rights as proclaimed by the Confederacy. Under the Confederacy, principle of states' rights emerged unfettered and triumphant. The third was the widespread and deeply flawed view of propagandists of the South that cotton is king. Can't tell you how important this was. And that a Southern republic would not only be freer, but economically superior to the North. Demonizing Northerners followed in short order. New Englanders were, quote, meddlers, jailbirds, outlaws, and disturbers of the peace, unquote. There had to be some irony involved in the labeling of former Puritans as jailbirds and outlaws by a region that prided itself on its frontier violence and, in the case of Georgia, had had felons as its first settlers. I could also add, I think it's well known that Southerners prided themselves on how much they could drink over Yankees, right? So that's kind of an irony there. Outright lies about Lincoln's intentions occurred with regularity in order to put the citizens of the new republic in a proper frame of mind. Indeed, Lincoln's promise not to touch slavery where it already existed only irritated the fire eaters more, exposing as it did their ultimate fear that without expansion, the South would only become darker, that is, more slaves. Being unable to transport slaves into the territories, as Senator Robert Johnson of Arkansas pointed out, would increase the population inequities because of the natural multiplication of colored people, unquote, until blacks became equal in numbers to whites, then exceeded them. At that point, a race war, they feared, would ensue. Despite 30 years of philosophizing, denials, obfuscation, scriptural revisions, and constitutional sophistries, it all came down to this. The South was terrified of large numbers of blacks, slave or free. It is not an exaggeration to say that the Civil War was about slavery and in the long run only about slavery. This is the point I've made, that Mike and I have made over and over and over. And when you go back to the origins in the Constitution, that there is no such thing as slavery in the Constitution, only persons, unfree persons or persons in servitude, with the emphasis being on persons, you know that the trajectory was set by the founders to get rid of slavery. I think this is an awesome, awesome story. It's one all kids should be preaching to the rooftops, that there's no inherent racism in America. Quite the contrary. The American Constitution, backing up the words of the Declaration that said all men are created equal, identified Black people as persons. It irritates me to no end to hear the 3/5 compromise saying that Blacks are 3/5 of a person. Baloney. 3 out of 5 Black persons were identified as voters and for purposes of taxation. Words are important. Words mean things. Phrases mean things. The founders knew what they were writing, and they kept slavery out of the Constitution because they intended for somewhere along the line people to manage to get it out of the country. They didn't think they could do it then, but they intended for it to be gone. If anyone doubted the relative importance of slavery versus states' rights in the Confederacy, one only had to look at the clauses in the CSA's Constitution that expressly said in Article 1, Section 8, Number 4, quote, "No bill of attainder, ex post facto law, or law denying or impairing the right of property in Negro slaves shall be passed." Let me read that part again. Right of property in Negro slaves. The Confederate Constitution. Read my lips and look at me. The Confederate Constitution called slaves property. The U.S. Constitution called them persons. It can't get any clearer than that. Okay. Article 4, Section 2 of the Confederate States of America Constitution stated that, quote, "The citizens of each state shall be entitled to all the privileges and immunities of citizens in several states and shall have the right of transit and sojourn in any state of this Confederacy with their slaves and other property." A slave was what? Property, not a person. "And the right of property in said slave shall not be thereby impaired." How can we make it clearer? The very essence of states' rights was the right to own a slave as property. They don't even mention these other rights. Yet a third specific reference to slavery in Section 3 of the same article stipulated that any escaped slave or slave lawfully carried into another state could be discharged from service or labor, but had to be returned to its owner. In all future territories acquired by the CSA, quote, "The institution of Negro slavery as it now exists," i.e. slaves are property, "in the Confederate States shall be recognized and protected by Congress and by the territorial government, and all inhabitants of the Confederacy could take their slaves with them lawfully into any Confederate territory." Man, you'd think that, gee, maybe slaves are pretty important to the Confederate States of America and their states' rights, right? Why do they keep talking about slaves? If it's about states' rights, it's not. It's about states' rights for you to own another person. That's the only right they're concerned with. No wonder CSA Vice President Alexander H. Stephens of Georgia made matters plain. "Our new government," he said, "is founded upon the great truth that the Negro is not the equal of the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and moral condition." That just violated the entire Declaration of Independence. Stephens calls slavery, quote, "the proper status of the Negro in our form of civilization," in contradiction to the libertarian reference to states' rights and liberty made by many modern neo-Confederates. Just read the DiLorenzo or people like that. The rebel leadership made clear its view that not only were Blacks not people, but that ultimately all blacks, including then free Negroes, should be enslaved. Right? That's what Stevens just said. In response to the Emancipation Proclamation, Jefferson Davis stated, quote, on and after February 22nd, 1863, all free Negroes within the limits of the Southern Confederacy shall be placed on a slave status. Wow. And be deemed to be chattels, they and their issue forever. He just said, even if you've been a free man and your family's been free in Virginia since the 1600s, we're going to turn you into a slave because you're black. Don't defend that garbage to me. Not only blacks, quote, within the Confederacy, but, quote, all Negroes who shall be taken in any of the states in which slavery does not now exist. If they grab somebody who's a free black in a state that doesn't have slavery, he says, in the progress of our arms shall be adjudged to occupy the slave status, and all free Negroes shall, ipso facto, or as Archie Bunker used to say, ipso fatso, be reduced to the condition of helotism, that's the slaves in Greek society, so that the white and the black races may ultimately be placed on a permanent basis, one superior, one inferior. This is our emphasis when we go through this. That basis, Davis said after the war started, was, quote, an inferior race, peaceful and contented laborers in their sphere. Man, this is really, really tough to read if you've ever been brought up on any of the notion of states' rights and these people who are just fighting for their white liberty and so forth. No. They're very clearly fighting to keep slaves, and they were trying to keep that fact from all of those lower class soldiers they were going to need to fill out those regiments. Next header, Fort Sumter. Let's start the war, and then we'll end here after another page. By the time Lincoln actually had taken the reins of the United States government in March 1861, the Deep South had seceded. Although Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, and others still remained in the Union, their membership was tenuous. From November 1860 until March 1861, James Buchanan still hoped to avoid a crisis. But his own cabinet was divided, and far from appearing diplomatic, Buchanan seemed paralyzed. He privately spoke of a constitutional convention that might save the Union, hoping that anything that stalled for time might defuse the situation. I have Buchanan easily in the worst 10 American presidents ever, probably in the top 6 after Biden, Obama, Carter, Wilson, FDR, Buchanan, Fillmore. That's probably my top 7 worst presidents. He was right in one thing: the crisis clock was ticking. Secessionists immediately used state troops to grab federal post offices, custom houses, arsenals, even the New Orleans Mint, which netted the CSA $500,000 in gold and silver. I mean, even if they hadn't fired a shot, they had already engaged in theft of federal property. How do you think that would be put down today? What do you think would happen to you if you and some buddies claiming states' rights walked into a Federal National Bank and took it over, claimed all the money in the vault? Come on, man. Federal officials resigned or switched sides. Only a few forts, including Fort Moultrie and Fort Sumter, both in Charleston, possessed sufficient troops to dissuade an immediate seizure by the Confederates, but their supplies were limited. Buchanan sent unarmed the Star of the West ship to reprovision Fort Sumter, only to have South Carolina shore batteries chase it off. Thus, even before firing on Fort Sumter itself, the war was on, and whatever effectiveness Little Buchanan, as Teddy Roosevelt later called him, might have had evaporated. The leading Democrat in his cabinet, Lewis Cass, resigned in disgust, and Northeasterners of all political stripes insisted on retaliation. Ignoring calls from his own generals to reinforce the Charleston forts, Buchanan hesitated. His subordinate, Major Robert Anderson, did not. At Fort Sumter, Robert Anderson and 70 Union soldiers faced South Carolina's forces. Fort Moultrie on Sullivan's Island and Fort Johnson on James Island straddled Sumter on each side, which sat in the middle of Charleston Harbor. Fort Johnson was already in Southern hands, but Moultrie held out. Because Anderson could not defend both Moultrie and Sumter, he was forced to relocate his troops to Fort Sumter, transferring them on the night of December 26th. This bought Buchanan time, for he thought keeping the remaining states in the Union held the keys to success. After February 1st, no other Southern state had bolted, indicating to Buchanan that compromise remained a possibility. Upon assuming office, Lincoln wasted no time assessing the situation. After receiving mixed advice from his new cabinet, the president opted to resupply the post, as he put it, to, quote, hold and occupy all federal property. He had actually first thought to, quote, reclaim federal territory in Confederate hands, but at the urging of a friend, struck the clause because of his inaugural address. He further made clear to the rebels that he would only resupply Anderson, not bring in additional forces. Nevertheless, the inaugural declared that both universal law and the Constitution made, quote, the union of these states perpetual. No state could simply leave. The Articles of Secession were null and void. He did hold out the olive branch one last time, offering to take under advisement federal appointees unacceptable to the South. Lincoln did not mince words when it came to any hostilities that might arise. He said, quote, you can have no conflict without being yourselves the aggressors. He was right. Quote, we are not enemies, he reminded them, friends. The mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield, the patriot grave to every living heart, hearthsome, all over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of the Union when again touched, as surely as they will be by the better angels of our nature. Didn't work out that way. Lincoln thought more highly of the Confederates than they thought of the Constitution, and that was all it took. All right, next time we're going to read Lincoln's entire first inaugural address. So I'll see you back here next time. In the meantime, if you don't have the 15th anniversary edition of Patriots History, you need to order it now so that when you get the 20th anniversary edition PDF, you'll know where to put all the inserts. Remember also, you need to grab a copy of Patriots History of Globalism. And I mentioned this to you, we're getting very, very close. We set a goal of $75,000 for a torch video production that we could make 3 scenes and send them to Angel Studios. If Angel Studios likes it, they will join us in producing a movie of about $6 million, maybe a little bit more if we can raise more. The goal is to keep the budget low so that we make some money on it and can do another one. Anyway, we're set to go. Our 3 scenes are now written and we are ready to go. We need about $7,000 or $8,000 more dollars. Hey, we're almost there. We're 90% of the way there. Help out. Go watch the trailer at the website, patriotshistoryusa.com. I'm sorry, Wild World of History, and watch the Patriots History trailer. And buy Larry a coffee. Buy me 10 coffees. Let's get this thing done. We made Rockin' the Wall back in 2010. We made this documentary film on time, on schedule, and within 1% of our estimated budget. And none of us had ever made a movie before, except my director, Mark Leaf. But the rest of us had. And yet we still brought it in on time and on budget. So we're very good at doing this if we have the money. Help us get the money. I'll see you guys back here on Wednesday.